Bro, how on earth do you even dig up evidence of people who lived back to 600 BC? Like, what trail are you supposed to follow that far back? I don't even know the history of my forefathers. This is a great question. This is a question about archaeological survey. Now, I'm not an expert on archaeological survey, but I can give you a basic rundown of what I know. Now, if you're in a city that has been inhabited for a really long time, what you'll usually see in cities like Mexico City, Rome, Damascus, Jerusalem, is that before you are allowed to do any major construction projects, you have to check the ground to make sure you aren't accidentally destroying archaeological relics. This is extremely common in cities that have been built over and over each other. So usually they'll do a little bit of digging to make sure there's not anything beneath, and then if it's approved, that can continue. It does happen occasionally, especially in Rome, especially in Mexico City, places that have been built on for a really long time, where they're working on a construction project and then they have to pause the work because they are now an archaeological dig site. What about places that are largely uninhabited? Well, you start to look for signs of human life, and this can come from anywhere. It can come from the name of a place where the name does not match the current description. For instance, you could have a place called Green Hill, and there's no hills in the area, which indicates that maybe there were people here previously who leveled a hill that used to be there. One example of this is Manhattan. Manhattan used to have a hill and a pond. That pond was filled with the ground from the hill, and that later became 5 Points, which you might know from the movie Gangs of New York, which is now modern-day Chinatown. But in other places, for instance, you look for stones that might be really close to each other that might indicate a wall or some sort of housing. You might look for unusual developments like hills that are not usually there. You might also just determine that a place is geographically advantageous, so it's likely that people would have settled there. That is the basic gist of how an archaeological survey works. You look for a place of interest, you search for human activity, you map out the most promising places, you secure funding, you get contractors and the necessary permits to start a dig, and then hopefully you find something. Now, how does this pertain to the Book of Mormon? How would you approach an archaeological survey for the Book of Mormon? Well, according to Joseph Smith himself, he found the golden plates at the Hill Cumorah in western New York, not too far away from Rochester. The golden plates were left behind by the last Nephite prophet Moroni when he was fleeing persecution from the Lamanites. According to Joseph Smith, at the Hill Cumorah, there were two different battles that took place. One between the Jaredites and the Shiz, where over 2 million people died, and another between the Nephites and Lamanites, where 230,000 people died. Now, traditionally, the LDS Church claims that the Hill Cumorah is located in western New York. However, more recently, they've started to claim that it's actually located in Mesoamerica. Personally, I'm a bit confused by this because it claims that Moroni lived northward, and Mesoamerica is further south than New York. However, if we were to believe that Joseph Smith was right in saying that the Hill Cumorah is where these battles took place, then we would start with an archaeological survey there. One thing that needs to be noted is the sheer scale of the two battles that I mentioned previously. 2 million losses on the Jaredites alone. There are only two battles in human history with more casualties. That is the Siege of Leningrad and the Battle of Stalingrad in World War II. 230,000 casualties between the Nephites and Lamanites is also highly significant, and there would be a great deal of evidence being left behind. This would be skeletons, coins, arrowheads, weapons, wheels, provisions, gear of any kind, especially things that are stone or metal in nature. It is said that these were fought with swords and spears and axes and clubs, and there would be remnants of that in the archaeological record. Now, one way that artifacts are commonly found is through agriculture. Farmers will start working the land and then they will uncover various artifacts. So in Europe, for instance, they have this thing called the Iron Harvest, where they uncover the land and then they find old unexploded ordnance from World War I and II, sometimes having to call in a bomb squad to dispose of it properly. In North America, it's quite common to find arrowheads while you're farming. And what we do know is that in the Hill Cumorah in western New York, before the Smiths arrived as farmers, that land was being worked on for livestock as well as crops such as wheat. So if the land was already being farmed and there was no signs of any past events happening when there would be an abundance of evidence, that is not a very good sign. Now, the area is now owned by the LDS Church, and whether or not they want to have excavations done on the site is entirely up to them. But basically, if the battles were to take place on the Hill Cumorah as dictated by Joseph Smith, well, then there would be an abundance of evidence. Because remember, you're talking about a battle with 2 million casualties and another battle with 230,000 casualties. There would be arrowheads, skeletons, coins. There would be things all over the place. And yet, there hasn't been anything found. Now, bear in mind that this is all supposed to be happening between 600 BC and 400 AD, which sounds like a long time ago, but it is not as long as other archaeological sites. For instance, I've mentioned previously Çatalhöyük in Turkey. That place was inhabited around 7500 BC to about 6000 BC. That place was much smaller in scale, and yet we have thousands of artifacts from that one site. There should be much more evidence for the events depicted in the Book of Mormon, given the sheer scale of the events depicted, and yet we don't have it.